The night I found out, I was standing in my own kitchen holding a cup of coffee I'd just poured and never drank. It was a Tuesday. I remember because the garbage trucks come on Tuesdays and I'd heard them rolling down the street about an hour earlier. Ordinary sounds, the kind that make you think the world is still the same as it was the day before. It wasn't. My son had been living with us for 4 months by then. Him and his wife. They'd come to us with a story about a bad stretch. His contracting business had slowed down, they were behind on rent, just needed a few months to get back on their feet. My wife and I had talked it over. We had the space, the spare bedroom, the finished basement, and he was our son. You don't turn away your own son. I should have paid more attention to the pauses in that conversation. The way my wife had said, of course, a little too quickly. The way she'd already seemed to know where his toiletries would go before I'd even said yes. I was 63 years old, and I didn't notice any of it. I'd spent 37 years as a structural engineer. I know how to look at a building and find the places where it wants to fail. The hidden cracks, the load-bearing walls that aren't bearing what they should. I was good at it. Am good at it. But you put me in my own house, in my own life, around the people I loved, and I became the worst version of myself. A man who believed what he wanted to believe. My son's name is Theo. He's 34. He has my build. Broad through the shoulders, tends to run a little heavy. And his mother's eyes. Light brown, almost amber in certain light. He could charm a room without trying. Always could. I used to watch him as a kid and think, that one's going to be all right. Whatever happens, that one will land on his feet. His wife. I'll call her my daughter-in-law. I don't say her name anymore. I've tried to scrub it out of the parts of my memory that still ache. She had a way of making you feel like you are the only person she was interested in. That kind of warmth that feels like sunlight until you realize it's a lamp pointed directly at your face. She called me Pop. Said it the first time she met me, right there in the driveway, before I'd even shaken her hand. Pop. I thought it was charming. My wife thought it was charming. We laughed about it at dinner that night. I think about that laugh now, and I feel like a man who laughed at his own eulogy. My younger brother had been suspicious from the start. He lives about 40 minutes outside of Columbus, runs a small landscaping operation, came up the same way I did. Our dad worked the line at a Dayton auto plant for 30 years and didn't complain once. My brother never had what you'd call a filter. He called things what they were. He'd met Theo's wife twice before she moved in, and both times he pulled me aside afterward. First time he said, "That girl is always watching." Second time he said, "She's counting things, Gus. I don't know what she's counting, but she's counting." I told him he'd been reading too many crime novels. He didn't push it, but he didn't drop it either. My full name is August. Gus. To everyone who knows me, I was named for a great-uncle who died before I was born, which always seemed to me like a strange reason to name someone something. But I grew into it. 63 years of answering to it. It fits now the way an old coat fits. A little worn at the edges, but mine. The house my wife and I live in, we bought it in 1998. 3-bedroom colonial in a suburb outside of Dayton. Good neighborhood, good bones. I'd done most of the updates myself over the years. New floors, new kitchen, converted the basement into a proper finished space with a half bath and a wet bar. We'd raised Theo in that house. Taught him to ride a bike in that driveway. Sent him off to college from that front porch. When he and his wife moved in, I told myself it was just a chapter. Every family has chapters like this. Hard stretches you help each other through. I gave Theo access to my business accounts. His contracting work had slowed, and he needed to invoice some old clients, he said. Just temporary. He needed to look like he had a functioning operation while he rebuilt. I said fine. I trusted him. He was my son. I don't know when that trust became a door someone was quietly walking through with both hands full. The night everything changed. I'd gotten up around 2 in the morning, I've had trouble sleeping since my late 50s. Comes with the territory, my doctor says. Nothing alarming, just the body starting to change its rhythms. I usually go downstairs, make coffee I don't need, sit at the kitchen table and read something until I feel tired again. That night I walked past the hallway toward the kitchen and saw light under my wife's office door. She keeps the small room off the dining room as her space. She does bookkeeping part-time for 3 local businesses, works from home 2 or 3 days a week. Neat room. Organized. She's always been better at systems than I have. The light was on at 2 in the morning. The door was not fully closed. I am not a man who snoops. I want to be clear about that. I walked past that door and went to the kitchen and made my coffee. I sat down. I read about 12 pages of a book about the Korean War that I still haven't finished. And then I got up to refill my cup, and I walked past that hallway again. The light was still on. And this time, through the gap in the door, I heard voices. 2 of them. I knew them both. My wife and my son were sitting at her desk at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, and they were going through something on the computer together, and they were speaking in low, careful voices like people who know there's someone in the house who shouldn't hear. I stood in the hallway for longer than I should have, long enough to hear my name, long enough to hear the words "before the end of the month." Long enough to hear my daughter-in-law's name mentioned in a way that made me understand she was expected somewhere. I went back to the kitchen. I sat down. I did not go to sleep. By the time the sun came up, I had not moved from that chair. My wife came down at 7, same as always, and said good morning and started the coffee she didn't know I'd already made, and asked if I'd slept all right, and I said not really. She looked at me for a second. Something passed over her face. Then she opened the refrigerator and started pulling out eggs. I watched her, and I thought, I have been married to this woman for 39 years. I thought I knew the weight of her silences. I thought I had learned, over decades, to read the difference between the silence of a woman who is tired, and the silence of a woman who is afraid, and the silence of a woman who is hiding something. I had been wrong. Or I had been looking away for a long time. I still don't know which one is worse. I didn't say anything that morning. I didn't say anything that week. I had learned somewhere along the way that the most useful thing a person can do when they suspect something is to act exactly as they normally would and watch. I called my brother. I didn't tell him everything. I just said, "You remember what you said about her counting things?" He said he remembered. I said, "I think I need you to help me figure out what she's been counting." There was a long pause on his end, the kind that means he's putting down whatever he's doing to give you his full attention. Then he said, "Okay, tell me." My brother has a friend who does IT work, not corporate, just local small business stuff, but smart, very smart. The kind of man who can look at a network and tell you everything that's moved across it in the last 3 months. I asked my brother to ask his friend to help me understand what had been happening on my home network and on the shared business accounts Theo had access to. What came back 8 days later was not a betrayal. It was an architecture. Theo hadn't just been looking at my business accounts, he'd been using them. Small amounts at first, expenses that could look like business costs, a few hundred here, a few hundred there. Then larger transfers routed through an account I didn't recognize in a name I didn't recognize, but which my brother's friend traced back to a LLC registered 6 months before Theo had told me his business was struggling. 6 months before, he'd been building the off-ramp before he even drove onto my road. My daughter-in-law had a background in property management. What she had been counting, it turned out, was the equity in my house. She had pulled my property records, my refinance history, and, through a notarized form I had absolutely no memory of signing, had been added as an authorized contact on a home equity line of credit I apparently held at a bank I didn't use. had never used. I sat with that information for a long time. My daughter-in-law had forged my signature or manipulated a document I'd signed without reading it carefully enough. My son had been draining operating funds from a business I'd spent 30 years building, and my wife of 39 years, had been in that office at 2 in the morning, sitting beside my son, going through files. My wife. I need to tell you something about her, because it matters. We were high school sweethearts, actual ones. I know how that sounds, like something out of a movie. But we met in the 11th grade, and we have never once been out of each other's lives since. We have had hard years. Years where we weren't sure about things. Like any marriage that's lasted that long. But I would have told you, the morning before any of this started, that there was no person on earth I trusted more completely. That's the part that had no floor to it. I found out what my wife was doing in that office the same way I found out everything else, by being still and being patient. She was not helping Theo steal from me. She was trying to find out how much he'd already taken. She'd noticed the account discrepancies 3 weeks before I did. She hadn't come to me because she was trying to get the full picture first. She was afraid of what I'd do if I found out before she could prove it. She knows me. She knows I would have walked straight upstairs and knocked on that door, and then it would have been loud and nothing would have been recoverable. She was protecting the evidence. She was protecting me when she finally told me all of this, sitting at that same kitchen table at a different 2 o'clock in the morning. She cried in a way I hadn't seen since her mother's funeral. She said she was sorry she hadn't told me sooner. She said she'd been terrified of what this was going to do to me. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I felt like something in my chest had been very tightly wound and had simply finished winding. Nowhere left to go. I said, "How much?" she said. "Enough. But not everything." The plan we made together took 3 weeks. My brother helped. He was calm in a way I needed him to be. I was not calm, not inside, but I could perform calm, and having him there made the performance easier. We went to an attorney, one that neither Theo nor my daughter-in-law had ever met. We documented everything, the IT report, the account transfers, the property records, the authorized contact form on the home equity line. The attorney said what they had done was criminal. He said fraud and forgery and elder financial abuse in the same conversation. Very quietly, the way doctors deliver diagnoses they've delivered before. I went home and I made dinner, chicken and roasted potatoes and the salad, because that's what I made on Thursday nights, because the routine had to hold. My daughter-in-law complimented the potatoes. My son asked about an old colleague of mine, someone he'd always liked, a fellow I'd worked with at the firm for 20 years. I answered every question. I passed the salad bowl. I refilled water glasses. I was 3 steps ahead. We gave them 2 more weeks of ordinary life. 2 more weeks of dinners and television and Sunday morning coffee. I needed that time, not for the legal preparation, which was mostly done, but for myself. I needed to sit across from my son at breakfast and understand, in my body, that the person I was looking at was not the child I had raised. That person was still there, somewhere, but something had been built over him, or in him, and it had made him capable of this. I had to make my peace with the fact that I might never understand how. The morning we acted, my wife went to her sister's house before 7. I didn't want her in the house for this part. My brother arrived at 8. We sat in the kitchen together and drank coffee and didn't talk much. He'd been there the morning of my dad's funeral, sitting the same way, just present, not filling the silence with anything unnecessary. I was grateful for it. Theo and his wife came downstairs around 9:30. He was surprised to see my brother. Said something easy, something casual. My brother nodded. Didn't smile the way he normally would have. Theo noticed that. I watched him notice it. I told him to sit down. He looked at his wife first. Just a glance, quick, the kind that means they have a private language. And then he sat. I put the folder on the table. I didn't raise my voice. I want to be clear about that too. I am a man who was raised to believe that if you have to shout, you've already lost. My father never raised his voice once in his life that I can remember. Not once. I have tried to live by that. I opened the folder and I walked them through it. The transfers. The LLC. The authorized contact on the home equity line. The timeline. The way the story about the struggling contracting business had begun 6 months after the offshore account was created. My daughter-in-law said nothing. Her face went the color of old paper and she stared at a fixed point just past my shoulder, and she said nothing. My son said, "Dad," I said, "I need you to listen right now." He stopped. I told them that the documentation had already been given to an attorney, that the attorney had already been in contact with both the civil litigator and the district attorney's office, that the home equity account had been flagged and frozen, that the LLC had been reported, that there was nothing left to maneuver. I told them they had 30 days to vacate the property. I told them they would be receiving formal legal notice before noon. I told them that whether the matter proceeded criminally would depend, in part, on the decisions they made in the next 30 days. My daughter-in-law asked to use the bathroom. My son sat very still. He looked like a boy who'd been caught. Not the man sitting in front of me, but the 12-year-old who had once broken a neighbor's window with a baseball and stood in our kitchen with that same expression. Caught. Knowing exactly what came next, he said, "I'm sorry, Dad." I looked at him for a long time. I said, "I believe that you mean that. I don't know what to do with it yet." He nodded. He looked at the table. I said, "I love you. That hasn't changed. But you don't live here anymore, and I don't know when I'll be ready to talk to you again." He left the room. I heard him on the stairs. I heard him and his wife talking upstairs. Quick, low, urgent. My brother sat across from me and poured more coffee into my cup without being asked, and we sat there while the house made the sounds of two people beginning to pack up what was left of a plan that had failed. In the weeks after, people asked me how I was doing the way people do when they're hoping the answer is simple. I never had a simple answer. I still don't. My marriage is intact, more than intact. My wife and I went through something that most couples don't survive. And the fact that she went looking for the truth before I had to tells me something important about who she is, something I had known and had maybe taken for granted. I have tried to stop taking it for granted. The legal matter is ongoing. I won't go into the details, not because I'm protecting anyone, but because it isn't finished yet, and some things deserve to be finished before they're told. My son and I have spoken once since that morning. A phone call about a month later. 15 minutes. He said he was in counseling. I said I was glad. He said he didn't expect me to forgive him anytime soon. I said that was a reasonable expectation. We didn't say goodbye at the end. We just stopped talking, and the call ended. My brother and I have lunch every other week now. We didn't do that before all of this. I think he'd been waiting for me to slow down enough to sit across from him, and this is how we finally got there. The house is quiet in the mornings. My wife has her coffee, I have mine. The garbage trucks come on Tuesdays. The old colleague Theo had asked about retired last spring, and I sent him a card and a bottle of good bourbon, and he called to say thank you. And we talked for an hour about a bridge we'd worked on together 25 years ago, and afterward, I sat in the kitchen for a long time, just sitting. I spent most of my career looking at structures and asking, where is this thing going to fail? What's the hidden crack? What's carrying weight it wasn't designed to carry? I applied that same eye to buildings for 37 years and somehow never thought to aim it at the people I was certain of. I aim it everywhere now. It's a lonelier way to live. I won't pretend otherwise. But I'm still standing in my own kitchen, in my own house. The coffee is hot. The light comes through the window in the morning, the way it always has. That's not nothing. That's, in fact, everything. I keep coming back to a conversation I had with my father when I was about 17. He was driving me home from a baseball game, and out of nowhere he said, "Gus, the worst thing a man can do is confuse loyalty with blindness." I didn't know what he meant then. I filed it away the way teenagers file away things that feel too adult to process. Somewhere in the back, behind everything more immediate. It took me 46 years and a folder full of fraudulent bank transfers to finally understand it. What Theo didn't happen because he was born bad. I don't believe that, and I won't. What happened was a slow erosion, a series of small choices that each felt, I imagine, like they were still reversible. One step, then another, until the distance from where he started was so great he couldn't see it anymore. That's how most collapses work. Not a single catastrophic crack, but 100 small ones, each one ignored. I think about my own role in that. Not to punish myself. I'm too old for that kind of self-indulgence, but because it's honest. I was a man who built his identity around being dependable, and somewhere in there I confused dependability with availability. I was always there, always the resource. I never asked hard questions because I told myself it wasn't necessary. Trust, I thought, looked like not checking. I know now that real trust, the kind that holds, looks like paying attention. My wife understood something I didn't. When she found those discrepancies and didn't come to me immediately, she wasn't withholding. She was thinking. She was using her head before her heart, which is the harder thing to do when the person you love is the one causing the damage. That kind of clear-eyed discipline, sitting with something terrible and still moving methodically through it, that took more strength than I had at that moment. I would have walked up those stairs and blown the whole thing open. She held, and because she held, we had something solid to stand on when the morning came. The three of us, me, my wife, my brother, we did what needed doing without flinching. That matters. Not because we won something, but because we didn't become something worse in the process. I didn't threaten. I didn't humiliate. I put the folder on the table and I spoke plainly. I think that's all a man can ask of himself when he's been handed a situation he never wanted. What I carry from this is simple, even if it wasn't easy to learn. Character isn't what you do when things are good. It's what you do when someone you raised, someone who carries your name, looks at you across a table, and you have to decide who you're going to be right now, in this moment, with this information. I chose to be the man my father raised. The man who doesn't confuse loyalty with blindness. That's the only thing I have that no one can transfer, forge, or take.